This is a TalkStation original podcast.
This article comes from Christianity Today and is written by Bob Smietana. It's entitled, Alistair Begg Stands by LGBTQ Wedding Advice with Sermon on Jesus' Compassion. For the past few weeks, Alistair Begg, pastor of Parkside Church in Chagrin Falls, Ohio, and host of the Truth for Life radio program, has been caught in what he calls a storm in a teacup over advice he gave about attending an LGBTQ wedding. That advice, he said in a sermon this past weekend, was based on Jesus' command for Christians to love even those they disagree with or disapprove of. Begg, drawing on a series of Bible texts, said, Jesus said you're supposed to love your enemies. He said these texts claim that Christians should show compassion and not condemnation for those who have gone astray. The sermon was a response to a controversy over comments Begg made during a promotional interview for a book last fall. Begg recounted talking to a woman whose grandchild was getting married to someone who was transgender. Begg, who opposes same-sex weddings, suggested she go to the wedding and bring a gift. By doing so, she would show her love for her grandchild, even though she did not approve of the wedding. He said, your love for them may catch them off guard, but your absence will simply reinforce the fact that they said, these people are what I always thought, judgmental, critical, unprepared to countenance anything. He added that Christians would have to take risks in order to show love to those around them. His comments set off a firestorm among some of his fans and supporters, in particularly those in conservative Calvinist and other evangelical communities. White evangelicals remain one of the least likely of all U.S. religious groups to support same-sex marriage, according to the Public Religion Research Institute. 38% of white evangelicals say they support same-sex marriage. By contrast, 87% of nuns, that is NONES, 81% of Jews, 77% of Buddhists, 77% of white mainline Protestants, and about 3/4 of Catholics approve of same-sex marriage. Begg had been scheduled to speak in March at the Shepherds Conference, a major Reformed Evangelicals pastors gathering led by California pastor and author John MacArthur. After Begg's comments became public, he and MacArthur talked and decided the controversy would be an unnecessary distraction. American Family Radio, an evangelical broadcasting network, dropped Truth for Life, a program based on Begg's sermons last week after his advice resurfaced and went viral. Begg, a native of Scotland who has lived in the United States for 4 decades, said he's long taught that sex outside of a marriage between a man and a woman is wrong, and so he was surprised at the controversy over his comments and the accusations that he had abandoned Christian teaching. He said, now we can disagree over whether I gave that grandmother good advice or not. Not everybody on the pastoral team thinks I gave good advice. All I was thinking about was how can I help this grandmother, he said, adding that he didn't want her to lose her grandchild. He went on to say he was glad his advice to the grandmother was helpful for her because he said, if I've got to go down on the side of condemnation or grace, I'll go down on the side of grace. I'll always go down on the side of compassion. So,
oh, I'm full of opinions. This article makes me really angry, if I'm just being honest. Mm-hmm. It makes me angry because as a pastor, I can sit here and tell you I have been hurt much worse by people who love Jesus than I've ever been by people who don't even like the idea of church. One question before I unload everything I'm feeling.
Okay. But you're not mad at me. I'm just the messenger. I just read the article.
Okay, good. Now y'all know how serious this is. Did he say in that advice that that is what Jesus would have her do, or was it just advice?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Now, when people come to you as a pastor and ask for your advice, of course, we, at least I, try to think, how would Jesus respond to
course.
this? And of course, I'm going to think in terms of grace. When Jesus said, somebody said to Jesus, what's the greatest law?
Right.
And he said, love God and love your neighbor.
Yeah.
You do that.
Your Christian neighbor that
good.
believes with your theology.
Well, he didn't add that part.
Oh, he didn't?
No.
Okay.
No.
We must have added that
We
later.
must have added that part.
So here's what bothers me. Jesus said that the world would know that we are his disciples by our love, and they know us by everything except for that sometimes. And it bothers me because our job as preachers, when we're there at the pulpit, is to preach the word. We don't even touch on politics at Liberty Church when it's a sermon. Now, if somebody wants to know my personal opinion, I'm entitled to it. I'll sit down and chop it up with you all day. But from a sermon, you're going to hear about what the scriptures are because that's what we've been called to do, to proclaim the good news. Now, my belief is that the closer you get to the Lord, the more that he will guide you into all truth. God is such a good father that he doesn't have an identical relationship with all of his children. I only have 2 kids, and I can't have an identical relationship with them. So I'm grateful for that. It's peculiar and unique and special the way he speaks to everybody. So that's where you should get a lot of your answers. But if you want my advice, I'll give you my advice. But the advice is not the same thing as this is what Jesus said. And the reality is Jesus didn't say what to do if a family member has a homosexual wedding.
No, he did not.
Now, what I can tell you is that, at Liberty, we do believe theologically that marriage is one man and one woman. But again, more than one man, one woman. It's one man and one woman in a marital covenant. And a lot of American churches forget to emphasize that fact. Sex outside of the covenant of marriage is just as sinful in the eyes of God, whether it's heterosexual or otherwise. That being said, I can say that, and I can also say that I would never officiate a same-sex wedding because I feel like I would be disobedient to the Lord to ask to call down his blessings upon it. This is me talking. That being said, whether or not you decide to go to a family member's wedding that you're not officiating, that really does need to be between you and God. I have been to same-sex ceremonies before, and I have turned down some before. I don't want to be a part of an agenda. I don't want to be used as a tool or a prop either way. But the reality is that you can't always control that. And so I guess I'll end with this and just toss it back to you because I'm feeling a little bit better now.
Good.
Is if you make your decision out of fear, it's probably wrong. If you decide to go because you're afraid of being ostracized from the family, it might be wrong. If you decide that you're not going to go because you're afraid God is going to smite you, like Bruce Almighty, smite me, almighty smiter, it's probably wrong. You need to get into a conversation with the Lord, with the Holy Spirit, and say, what is the best way for me to show your love?
Now, as a pastor, we both had situations where people came to us for advice. And this is a sticky situation for this grandmother. She says, I really don't know what to do. Help me know what to do. And I hope that whatever decision she made wasn't because the pastor said you should do this.
Yeah.
Somebody comes to me, I'll give them some pastoral advice. I'll say, well, we hear about this in the scriptures. We hear about this in the scriptures. Think on these things. Pray about this. Let God be the one that guides you to make a decision.
Right.
And if you choose A, we understand these are some things that could happen. If you choose B, these are some things that could happen.
Right.
Help use those in making your decision. And this I was told this in seminary, never tell somebody what to do.
Yeah.
That's not your job as a pastor.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's the other thing that made me angry. I just didn't want to dominate this whole segment.
Yeah.
The church is guilty of overreach in so many areas. And by default, a lot of times people, when they ask a pastor for advice, they are asking you to tell them what to do. And so I'm always very quick to say what I have is biblical counsel. I'm not even a therapist. I can give you biblical counsel, but it still needs to be something that jives between you and the Lord and that is good between you and the Lord. So here's information for you. Use this as a tool to make your decision. Because if you don't specify that, a lot of times people will assume it's almost like we're their local pope. Right. And we're telling them what to do. Sorry if you're Catholic and listening, I'm not bashing you. I'm just saying that they take it like you're supposed to do this because we have said it. And that is overreach from the church. And oftentimes unintentional, but it still happens.
Last Sunday, I preached a sermon on Mark chapter 1 where Jesus comes into the temple and he's teaching, and the people say, oh, he teaches with such authority, unlike the people that have been teaching. Okay, and it's not that Jesus was there to bash the other teachers
at all.
It's just that, you can look at the Scriptures and what the Scriptures say, and what the Scriptures say is what they say. But Jesus, being God, being the author of the Scriptures, he knew the meaning, the intent behind what was written on the page. And so as a pastor, what I try to do is not claim to be the expert, not have people look at me and say, oh, what a wonderful teacher, what a wonderful preacher. And there are Sundays that they shouldn't say that at all. But that what they're hearing from me or what I'm doing for them is I'm directing them towards looking at God and hearing what God is saying. And that's what matters.
Yeah, the reality is you cannot intentionally try to grow your own fame and the fame of Jesus in the same conversation or the same sermon. No. So it's best just to be humble and obedient and point people to somebody who knows the answer to everything.
I'm Ryan Kelly.
I'm Lynn Schultz.
And we're the hosts of the Senior Moment Podcast.
Each week we bring you conversations with experts right here in our community about the common and uncommon challenges facing our aging population and caregivers.
We discuss the challenges of caring for a loved one with dementia, as well as the importance of health planning, family history, and much more.
Join us every week for Senior Moment, streaming now on Spotify, YouTube, and at CarolinaCoastonline.com.